This is Thelonious Martin. This is my 24/7 HH King beats. Make It Better off the Desert Fadilla beat tape. So it starts off one of my favorite samples I flipped in a while. One of my favorite 70s groups, Switch. More popularly known for this sample for Rich Boys, Throw Some D's on It. If you listen to their other albums though, it's a lot of deep cuts. So yeah, it's the intro to my last beat tape, Desert Fadilla. Every February I try to do a project dedicated to Dilla. It's my idol. The reason I make beats. It's probably the biggest influence over the sound I've become popular with. It's the sample chop techniques. It's drums. There's plenty of interviews with Questlove that's saying like, man, like, dude's one of the best drummers and he's not a drummer. Like, he's drumming solely off the drum machine. I think the best way to describe it is like, that's my Michael Jordan. So like, for me, it's learning the fadeaway, it's learning the crossover, it's sticking the tongue out, it's the whole thing. Like, I feel like I try to be like the Kobe Bryant to the Michael Jordan. So like, you model your whole game after that. You find different pockets, different things to try to improve upon that the predecessor couldn't. Manipulating the sample beyond belief, making it say something it wasn't before. It's the drums and make sure the drums are crisp and find different pockets and not quantizing and having things be sloppy but neat at the same time. It's the whole thing for Dilla. It's kind of have to set the tone with an intro for any tape, any album, beat tape, whatever the case may be. So I wanted to set off the tone correct. Kind of plays the sample, some of the chops I use, and then it goes into the section where I kind of break it down, leave it a little bit more. When I got to this part, it's funny because like sometimes I'll get to a certain place, I'm like, I don't know what I'm gonna do or what phrasing and sequences I'll get to. So sometimes I'll even just start hitting notes or whatever. And now when I got to this point, I was like, wait a second, that might be something that might. That section and playing it that way where you don't let certain notes end and you don't like kind of like let it overlap a little bit. I think when I got to that point, I was like, okay, that's the main sequence. That's what's going to be the meat and potatoes of this record. So I don't know. When it comes to record digging and just trying to pick certain records, there's certain textures you hear, certain instruments you hear. Even when you you get experience in digging, you start seeing similar producers, musicians, and you'll start to notice repetition, certain things, whether it's record labels, certain producers, musicians. So for me, this Switch record, something I'm very familiar with in terms of the textures of their records and stuff. I think one of my favorite flips they have is I think the intro to Grind Date. And so this record had a lot of similar textures, a certain feel to it. So I want this to kind of be my intro and I want to flip it a certain way. And just it's open, the vocals are really feathery. It's something you hear and you kind of feel like as a producer, you're like, I have to chop this up. I have to give this a try or whatever. It's very open, it's beautiful, there's keys. And then there's also not a lot of bass notes. It's just really like a lot of mid-tones, so it's very feathery. Yo, when I first heard this sample, it was just the fact that it was, I don't know, there's something about the musicality and the openness of it. And just the way they're hitting certain notes, it just made it very open and allowed me to chop up stuff a certain kind of way, whatever. And sometimes I'll try to even refrain from using the vinyl because sometimes the audio quality won't turn out necessarily the best. There's a lot of crackling or a lot of other noise I don't want. It's actually funny. During Freddie Gibbs and Madlib's Pinata tour, actually, I think I was here from when Freddie did this interview, and I went to the show, whatever, and afterwards, I got a chance to finally actually meet Madlib and kind of like talk with him. And it was after the show, and it's the green room. What was it, at the Metro? For anyone watching this, a green room for a concert, it's not necessarily a glamorous place. Even at the Metro's a great venue, but it's not like a glamorous place. It's where rappers change their clothes, or them and their entourage eat whatever catered food is brought to them. It's not really like a extravagant place, whatever. It's not the Taj Palace. It's not extravagant. What I'm trying to say. And so it's Freddie in there, and everyone's chilling, and Madlib walks in, and the whole energy of the room changes immediately. He's wearing big, chunky silver jewelry. With turquoise accents, and he's holding a wine glass, which to this day I don't know where he got it from because it's Metro, it's the green room. Like, what's going on. Like, where did he get a wine glass? Is this in the place where people are carrying wine glasses? He's sipping wine like looks like a wizard. I finally get a chance to talk to him. There's a bunch of other producers and cats that are really, like, you know, obviously it's Madlib. And so me and him start talking. I tell him about Adult Swim and how him and Dilla were major influences for me. Somehow we get to talking about sample sources. And he even tells me, like, and it's funny because I do it too, like, he'll grab stuff off YouTube. He doesn't care where he gets it from or the quote-unquote audio quality, as long as it flips, it makes it sound good. And so it kind of took me back, and I was like, dang, if Madlib will take stuff off YouTube, and I take stuff off YouTube, I don't care about people, oh man, you don't get the fun. Like, nah, man, fuck it. If it sounds good, and you flip it, it's all that matters. It's about making fire beats. It's not about getting to those, like, ridiculous small details or whatever, because people get caught up in that stuff and they kind of remove themselves from what they're supposed to be creating for it. You know, that's a weird side story. So yeah, I grabbed the sample off, I think either YouTube or I think I just had a bunch of random Switch albums on my iTunes or whatever. So I got the sample chops, and what I'll do is sometimes I'll on top of the main layers, I'll add different inflections and stuff on top of the sample. So even I'll add like different quieting. I'll have like a silent pad to like add like space. And so I'll have a sample loop, and I'll be able to add different, what I call them like glitches or different sound bites on top of them to kind of like chop up the phrasings and make different kind of almost like drum fills for like a drummer, essentially, where it's like you have your main groove and you add different little like inflections and different tones to them. We kind of like change up, because, you know, when you have a loop, almost, it's interesting because like funk music, you get to like some like really good funk records, it's a groove they maintain for like 6-7 minutes, and the different things about the sample or different things about the music, whatever, would be the different inflections and changes they add to it to kind of make the same thing different over and over again. So what I'll try to do is I'll add these different inflections and notes and changes to the sample loop to kind of give it the same feeling, so you kind of get entranced, but at the same time it's adding different tones and different things to it. So you'll go back and you'll listen to it, you'll be like, oh yeah, at 1 minute and 2 seconds, it's that favorite drop right there. It's a Kareem Riggins record. It's a Summer Madness, and it's like this Brazilian sample. It's this loop or whatever, but he keeps adding different details and different things. And when you actually go listen to the sample, you realize he took all these different things, different parts of the sample or whatever. And so there's different things you try to study and try to impose into your own production. Because as a producer, you should always be a student. You should always continuously try to, you know, grow and learn. So certain BPMs will dictate the groove and the bounce of the record. And so this record is at 90 BPM actually, which induces a certain bounce and choppiness to the drums and whatnot. Even at 90 and stuff, it kind of allows you to either have this slower groove where you kind of stretch it out, or you'll have a quicker choppiness to the sample, and it will, you know, allow you to kind of get a little more like chop and bounce to the drums or whatnot. You know, you really try to go into deep detail as a producer, because that's what separates you from other people. It's attention to detail, you know, authenticity, and really paying attention to those things that'll really separate you from other people's. If you really do apply those details and that attention to detail, you know, you can be amazing with this. So I like my kicks to almost be subby, in the sense where if you drive in a cheap vehicle, they might blow out a speaker, they might, you know, make your rear view mirror rattle a little bit. It's always very important to me. I remember my dad had this old Land Rover and we played G-Unit tapes. And this is before trap music was really a thing, so we listened to G-Unit. Even those beats would make like mirrors rattle and shake. He had 212s in the trunk. And so that's kind of vivid to me, a kind of a memory in terms of like how low end should sound in a record, especially on a hip hop record where it's not necessarily relying upon 808s and stuff, where it's the kick drum and the different textures of it really hit a certain way. And so even on top of that, we have these little like bleeps and bloops. I watch Knots is one of my favorite producers. His Instagram will probably make the average bedroom producer cry, because he makes like 10 beats a day and they all sound different and crazy. It's another like producer I study and watch, because his attention to detail and his meticulousness and how he approaches certain things is incredible. So I found out this little thing that he does in terms of like the bass notes, and if you hit certain high bass notes on a higher octave, it adds these nice like little bleeps and bloops and kind of like these extra digital sounds to things and adds a nice touch. I really kind of like really got in the in-between of the notes and stuff, and it allowed me to do a lot of different things with the sample. Sometimes, depending on the sample, if it has a lot of drums in it, you might have to cut between notes or cut between drums or whatever. But one of the tips I did learn from studying Dilla a lot is Dilla would cut on the kick and the snare of a sample. So you would use that to his ability and use that to kind of even at times not even really have to use drums, but actually play the sample out and use the kick chops and the snare chops to come up with something completely different. This one though, I didn't have to do any of that or get too freak with the technique. Actually, what I did was I chopped on eighth notes instead of quarter notes. Quarter notes would be usually for the kick and snare kind of chops, whatever. But for this, I got real small. I like to go on micro chops so I can really manipulate the sample a lot more differently than what I usually do. And so for drums, honestly, the only thing I quantize nowadays will be my snare. My snare stays in place. The hi-hats, the kicks, and everything else is kind of revolve around this very tight but loose feel. There's a Neptune's documentary. I keep referencing all these different producers and different things because aside from my major influence with Dilla, I've tried to remain a student amongst other things and try to study other producers and see what makes them great. And so there's this Neptune's documentary called A Planet from the Sun. I think it's around the time that Pharrell and Chad were making Clones. And this is like bit in the documentary where Chad is talking about drums and how the kick should hit you in the chest and the snare should kind of snap your neck so you get this full body groove and whatnot. And so what I gathered from that is, all right, so the snare should really pop and then the kick should really hit you in the chest and kind of feel full. So we got these drums. And drums is hidden. So I always try to make sure my drums always have some bounce, some feel to make sure they sound crisp. And so I try to get a nice hi-hat groove to kind of get the rhythm to it. It's very loose. Kicks usually follow the sample. I usually start with samples first and then do drums afterwards. Or if I have like a drum idea in my head, I'll start with drums first and kind of try to mold the sample to it. Well, when that usually happens is when I'm doing drums for something and I don't feel like the drums fit the sample, but I really like the drum groove. So I'll try to I'll copy and paste it into a whole new session and try to figure out what groove that necessarily is. But for this, sorry, with the sample, I knew that I wanted, this is 90 BPM too, so it's kind of a little more up-tempo than what I usually like to do. Before I didn't like to do beats at certain BPMs or whatever. It's just, I was kind of I really like 80 BPM for some reason. It's like a lot of the Just Blaze and the Alchemist joints are kind of a little more slower, and the Dilla joints a little more up-tempo. And so for this tape, obviously it being the Dilla, does it for Dilla beat tape, I wanted to keep that groove, that up-tempo. So it's 90 BPM, it's got a certain bounce to it. So those are the drums. I like to say kind of groovy at times. And on top of that, I started adding bass lines, little different touches and things like that to really get really detailed and stuff. I think honestly, probably one of my biggest strides as a producer now is learning how to play bass lines, learning how to get more musically in tune and add those details instead of having to call my musician homies, which I still love doing. So we got a very doom bass line that kind of follows the sample a little bit, kind of gives it even more bounce than just the kick pattern, kind of adds another layer, another section of groove. And one of the major things to do when you have obviously bass lines and kicks, whatever, you kind of want to have the bass sitting in a certain place and the kick sitting in a certain place because they're on top of each other. It kind of gets in the way. It doesn't mesh as well. And so for this, I have the bass line sitting in a certain EQ and the kicks in a certain EQ, so it kind of play off of each other and kind of give it a certain bounce. And the thing is, you try to, especially for beat tapes or whatever, it's if someone's listening to this, there's no raps. You kind of have to create different sections, different pockets, and different details to keep the listener interested for a minute and 30 seconds or however long. This is an intro, so it has a long ass intro in the front. So I think the track ended up being almost 3 or 4 minutes. it's almost like 4 minutes. So I had to make sure there's different sections, different things to keep the listener, entranced and kind of in that groove that I try to create. So there's drops, bass line touches, and pads, and all these different details and things within the beat. I forgot about this. There's a lot of different things in it. And so even from the intro where I kind of break down the different chops, and kind of show the listener like, okay, this was that section, this was the sample, this is how I sped it up and made it a certain way, and then drop the drums. Now I get to kind of get more work done just by myself. Usually I might have another keyboard or two with me, or a synthesizer or something like that with me. And this is kind of like the broken down travel setup in the sense where all I really need is my MPD 32 laptop. I'm using Logic 10. Reluctantly, one of my hard drives recently crashed. And before that, I was using Logic 9 for the longest, even to like begrudgingly against the well wishes of others. Like, no man, upgrade, switch to 10. I'm like, man, I've been using Logic 9 for like 7 years. I'm not switching shit. Fun fact, Flying Lotus was using Reason 2.5 for a majority of his previous albums. I think he might have switched to Ableton as of recently, but like, it's interesting is like, if you just know how to master a certain program, you don't really need to quote unquote upgrade or do a bunch of other like stuff. Kind of just like master a certain craft. So yeah, around Logic 10, I essentially use Logic 10 like I would use an MPC and just run everything from the program through the MPD. So something like this beat with more bells and whistles and more details is where I'm trying to take my album, my next project forward. It's an expansion of what I know before and kind of an exploration. Me taking a risk to make something newer and something more big. But if you're not taking a risk with your creation and with your creative process, then you're not necessarily pushing yourself to the place you could be at.